in our institutions. Mr. Speaker, we understand that everyone is tired of this pandemic. We understand that Canadians are frustrated with COVID. Some protesters came to Ottawa to express their frustration and fatigue with public health measures, and that's their right. Like I said, it's a right that we'll defend in this free and democratic country. But illegal blockades and occupations are not peaceful protests.
We will continue.
To stand up for jobs and our economy, and to stand up for the freedom of Canadians and for public safety. Merci, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments, and we'll try our best to get all parties represented during this time. The honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Public Safety, and the Minister for Emergency Preparedness have repeatedly stated that there is evidence of foreign extremist financing behind this convoy. Last week at Public Safety Committee, Deputy Director of Intelligence for FinTrack, Barry McKillop, stated that there is no evidence that this funding in Ottawa is tied to ideologically motivated extremism. Under further questioning, he stated that there has been no spike in suspicious transactions. Under what basis is this government freezing the bank accounts of Canadians in violation of Section 8 of the Charter against unreasonable search and seizure?
Le très honorable Premier Ministre.
Mr. Speaker, I think it is going to be extremely important that in this House over the coming days there will be important and robust debate on many such issues. But I can highlight once again, Mr. Speaker, that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms continues to apply. The Emergencies Act is subject to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the measures that we've brought forward are proportional, measured, and responsible, and designed to get Canadians their lives back, their communities back, and restore their freedoms.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Je pense qu'à peu près tout le monde est d'accord sur l'intention qui est de mettre un terme au siège d'Ottawa, qui est à peu près la seule manifestation hostile encore active sur le territoire. Si l'intention est correcte, le moyen utilisé pourrait très bien ne pas l'être. Si, en effet, le Québec a disposé des manifestations à Québec sans la loi sur les mesures d'urgence, si, à Couts, non seulement la frontière a été ouverte sans la loi sur les mesures d'urgence, mais les armes ont été saisies sans l'intervention de la loi sur les mesures d'urgence, si le pont des ambassadeurs a été ouvert sans la loi sur les mesures d'urgence, si la situation au Manitoba a été réglée sans la loi sur les mesures d'urgence, et il y en a d'autres. Comment le premier ministre peut-il prétendre dès le début de son discours qu'il n'existait aucun autre moyen pour intervenir et pourquoi n'a-t-il pas exclu les provinces et le Québec qui ne veulent pas être assujettis ou recourir au pouvoir de cette loi?
Le président honorable, le premier ministre.
Les forces policières de juridiction à travers le pays ont maintenant plus d'outils pour contrer ces barricades et ces occupations illégales quand et si ils surviennent. Nous allons continuer de s'assurer que les mesures soient proportionnelles et raisonnables et limitées dans le temps, mais c'était important. Et c'est important de donner plus d'outils aux policiers qui en ont besoin. On comprend que dans bien des parties du pays, on a pu bien contrôler la situation, mais la loi sur les mesures d'urgence s'applique à travers le pays, mais ne sera utilisée que lorsqu'elle est nécessaire.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For weeks, this occupation was allowed to continue. People lost their wages, citizens were harassed. The potential for violence grew. And the federal government, instead of acting, argued over jurisdiction. So what responsibility does the Prime Minister take for the inaction that made the Emergencies Act necessary?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to reiterate that from day one of these barricades and blockages and occupations, the federal government has been supplying resources and working closely with local police of jurisdictions to ensure that they had the tools that they needed. Obviously, this situation has evolved, this situation has escalated, but every step of the way, the federal government has been there to support the law enforcement of jurisdiction. Here in Ottawa, that means the Ottawa Police Services and the OPP, and we will continue to be there with the RCMP as necessary.
Time for about a 15-second question and answer. The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Thank you very much, Speaker. As you're very much aware that my riding includes Parliament Hill, which has been under siege for over 3 weeks now, Speaker. My community has been held hostage, and I can assure you that these protests have not been peaceful or lawful. My question to the Prime Minister is, how is this Emergencies Act is going to help my constituents in Ottawa Centre?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians continue to have the right to free expression, the right to protest peacefully, but occupying the downtown of our major cities, protesting and blocking border crossings is unacceptable. That is why we have given more tools in a proportional way to police officers.
Reprise du débat, continuing debate. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to begin by thanking the Prime Minister for commencing this important debate on the invocation of the Emergencies Act for the first time. And I want to begin with a number of expressions of gratitude, both to my colleagues on this side of this House. I'd also like to begin by expressing my gratitude to the opposition for the informed debate which we're about to have. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank Canadians because I know that this has been a very difficult time, a period of great frustration and anxiety and uncertainty, and it is not lost on me, and I hope not on all members of the Chamber, that the confluence of events of the pandemic and now these illegal blockades does create for an emotionally charged atmosphere, and sometimes we let that get the better of us here in this Chamber, but my sincere hope is that we'll be able to have a principled debate about why it is that the government has chosen to invoke the Emergencies Act, the paramount reason being the health and safety of all Canadians. Now, you've heard the Prime Minister set out what the test for the invocation of the Emergencies Act is, and I know that my colleague, the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General and other members will elaborate on that, but I want to focus my comments on what I believe are the perceived and real risks to public safety that we have seen over the last number of weeks, which emanated from the so-called Freedom Convoy. Now, this convoy has been taking to the streets right across the country and at other critical infrastructure, including our borders, our national symbols, our communities, our neighborhoods, and it has had a profound impact. And I would submit to you, Mr. Speaker, and to members of this chamber, a very negative and detrimental impact to public safety. I want to touch on a number of the ports of entry which have been interrupted significantly as a result of the participation of those in the illegal blockades, including at Coutts in Alberta, Emerson in Manitoba, Surrey, British Columbia, Windsor, Ontario, Sarnia, Ontario, Fort Erie, Ontario, as well as here in Ottawa. I hope that all members would recognize that the kind of conduct that we have seen at our borders puts into serious question, the integrity and the security of this country. The impact at Coutts, for example, has cost the economy approximately $48 million per day. In Emerson, $73 million a day. And in Windsor, where we conduct nearly or roughly a quarter of all of our daily trade with our most important trading partner in the United States, roughly $390 million. Now, those are just numeric figures, but I think about the translation of those dollar figures into the impact on Canadians' jobs, on families, on those who are just trying to get by right now. And whatever the motivation of some individuals who have commingled with those organizers and agitators of this illegal blockade, whatever their concerns are with regards to the government's strategy to get out of the pandemic, which of course is to get vaccinated, it has become something much, much more concerning. Now, Mr. Speaker, I do want to say that we have made some progress at these ports of entry, and that is in large part thanks to the very important work that has been undertaken by the members of our law enforcement. Je veux remercier les efforts, les énergies de la GRC, même tous les forces policières qui font le bon travail sur le terrain. Il y a beaucoup de progrès. Maintenant, la majorité de les frontières sont ouvertes. C'est bon pour l'économie, c'est bon pour le commerce, c'est bon pour les Canadiennes et les Canadiens. Mais cette progrès n'est pas une certainté. And it is very important that we continue to guarantee the progress that we have made. I want to speak for a moment about the situation here in Ottawa, and I know that many of my colleagues in the NCR caucus have spoken very articulately and very passionately about the damage that has been caused in our communities and our neighborhoods. Mr. Speaker, I've heard some members on the opposition side try to somehow cast a minimization, some kind of effort to generalize what is going on outside of this chamber as being legitimate. It is not, Mr. Speaker. It's illegal, and it causes great harm. We've seen people intimidated, harassed, been threatened. We've seen apartment buildings that have been chained up. We've seen fires set in the corridors. Residents are terrorized, and it is absolutely gut-wrenching to see the sense of abandonment and helplessness that they have felt now for weeks. And I want to assure them that since day one, that the federal government has done everything that it could to provide additional resources. The RCMP has sent three sets of reinforcements to the Ottawa Police Service, and will continue to do whatever we can to help. But it is also important, I think, for members of this chamber to recognize that we here, we write the laws, we set the policies, but we trust our police, our law enforcement, to enforce them. And that is why it is so important that we use every tool in our box, especially now, where we find ourselves in a predicament, in a dilemma, in a situation that has perhaps never been seen before. Now, I ask myself, Mr. Speaker, and I hope others are reflecting as well, what's this all about? And trying to step back and looking at what it is that's occurring. And I'm concerned. I've heard some people say and still say that this is a protest about vaccines. It's not. Or that it's a protest about mandates. It is not. I've heard some people say still that this is a protest about freedom. Mr. Speaker, what is going on outside in the streets of Canada at our borders is most certainly not about freedom.
Absolutely not.
It is not about It is about a very small, organized, and targeted group of individuals who are trying to strip away the very freedoms that we here have sworn to uphold.
Exactly.
That the generations of those who preceded us have sworn to uphold, Mr. Speaker. Now, I've seen many striking similarities in the way that these blockades have manifested across the country, the tactics that they are using, the timing in which they are occurring, the targets, whether they are national symbols, like the Parliament here, or provincial legislatures, like the War Monument outside, where we hear members speak passionately about their forebears who went and made the sacrifices for the freedoms that we now enjoy. The individuals outside are tearing down the barriers to attack those monuments. Now, what does that say? Those are going. I know members are heckling, but I'm encouraging them to reflect. And also the rhetoric, Mr. Speaker. And yes, the rhetoric. And yes, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding the efforts of my colleagues to try to shout me down, I'm speaking here on behalf of constituents and Canadians, Mr. Speaker. And yes, there is an ideologically motivated operation that we see in the rhetoric here that is meant to incite. And that is indeed one of the reasons why, Mr. Speaker, that we have chosen, that we've had to invoke the Emergencies Act. Now, I want to assure members that these are very targeted measures, that they are time limited, that they are protected and bound by the Charter. And for those who want to ask questions as to how those powers are going to be enforced, part of the debate is going to ensure that there are the sufficient guardrails and safeguards in place. There will be transparency on how those measures are implemented. There will also be an inquiry to be sure, so that we can learn from these lessons and make sure that this is an instrument that has been used responsibly and in a manner that is consistent with the Charter to uphold the health and safety of all Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Now, at the end of the day, we're all here, I would hope, to do one thing, and that is to protect the health and safety of Canadians. We find ourselves at a crossroads with the pandemic, but we've made progress. We've made progress with the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, and we are making progress in restoring public order. But it is absolutely imperative that we have these debates in a principled, in a reasonable manner that is respectful of our constituents, respectful of Canadians, and that is certainly something that I hope that we will see over the next number of days.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister today and in a news conference yesterday has repeatedly stated that there is an ideologically motivated violent extremist. There is a small group of extremists who are willing to use violence. He says that there are ties between extremists that were apprehended in Coutts and extremists here in Ottawa. But when asked repeatedly by the media to back up that assertion with evidence, the Minister failed to provide any evidence. We are talking about invoking a once-in-34-year Emergencies Act. Parliamentarians deserve real evidence, not conjecture, from this minister before we can ever contemplate suspending the rights of Canadians. And what basis does this minister make to claim that there are violent extremists in Ottawa?
The Honourable Minister.
I want to thank my colleague for the question, and I'm afraid he operates from the false premise that the Emergencies Act is any kind of suspension of charter rights. It's not. As I've said throughout the course of the debate, and as the Act itself says, that all of the powers that need to be exercised in the Emergencies Act must be done in accordance with the Charter. Mr. Speaker, that means ensuring that Section 8 is respected. That means, which protects people from the right of It guarantees the right to be protected from any unreasonable search and seizure, and same for Section 7 as well. Thank you.
Commentaire, questions and comments. L'honorable député de Avignon-la-Métis-Matane, Matapédia.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le ministre, en début de discours, disait qu'il se dit fier d'avoir déposé cette motion, qu'il est fier d'être le premier ministre de la Sécurité publique à invoquer cette loi sur les mesures d'urgence depuis son application en 1988. Et je me demande comment il peut être fier d'appliquer une loi qui vient limiter les droits fondamentaux des Québécois et des Canadiens. Vous entendez le premier ministre le dire, c'est une mesure de dernier recours. Malheureusement, je ne pense pas qu'il a utilisé tout ce qu'il y avait dans son coffre à outils avant d'en arriver là. J'aimerais savoir quelle autre action il aurait pu prendre avant d'en arriver à la loi sur les mesures d'urgence.
L'honorable ministre de la Sécurité publique.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et comme d'habitude, je veux remercier ma collègue pour sa question. La loi des mesures d'urgence est une mesure de dernier recours. Ce n'est pas la première option, ce n'est pas notre préférence. Et ça, c'est la raison que de tout le débat de cette convoi, de cette blocade illégale, nous avons ajouté beaucoup de ressources pour aider les forces policières pour restaurer l'ordre public sur le terrain. Mais maintenant, nous arrivons à un moment qui est très dur avec beaucoup de défis. Et ça, c'est la raison que nous avons introduit cette mesure. Merci.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And while I was listening to the honourable member's speech, he spoke of the people that are being impacted by the blockades. He spoke about the harassment and the assaults, and I know I've spoken to a lot of workers in this downtown about that as well. It's truly heartbreaking. I think of the workers and the businesses that have been impacted negatively. I think about the people at the Rideau Centre. I think about people within my own region in southwestern Ontario and those businesses who have been impacted. But what is this government's plan to help those workers and those businesses after this debate is done? After we've seen that the protesters have gone home, after everything, we've been asking for this government to come up with a plan. So what's the plan for those people after?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Thank my colleague for her question, and I share her concerns about public safety and certainly the impact of these illegal blockades across the country has not only undermined public safety, but it has impacted families' abilities and individuals' abilities to provide for themselves. Mr. Speaker, I want to assure my colleague that we will work with her and with all members so that once we clean up these illegal blockades and we have public safety restored on the streets here in Ottawa, that the Government of Canada will continue to be there to support Canadians as we have been throughout the pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Reprise du débat. Continuing debate. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will be splitting my time with the member for Mégantic-L'Érable today. Speaker, this week, for the first time since its passage, the Emergencies Act has been invoked by the Prime Minister. This is historic, and it is extremely disappointing. The Prime Minister has invoked the Act, he says, to deal with the protests that have gathered here in downtown Ottawa and blockades that were happening at the Coutts border in Alberta, the Emerson border in Manitoba, the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, and the border at Surrey, all of which, by the way, are now open. There are no more blockades at any borders. What's left are the trucks parked outside here in Ottawa that need to move or be moved. However, throughout the last 3 weeks, the Prime Minister has failed to take meaningful action to de-escalate the protests here or use any tools that he may have available. Instead, he has jumped straight to the most extreme measure. And as he has invoked the Act, he has failed to meet the high threshold set out by the Emergencies Act to justify it. That being, and I quote, when a situation seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada, and when the situation cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of the country. Conservatives do not believe the government has shown that threshold has been met, and thus we will be voting against it. Keep in mind, Mr. Speaker, this Act is already invoked and is the new law of the land. Our debate and the vote on Monday can only stop it if the NDP vote with Conservatives and the Bloc to stop it. Supporting the use of the Emergencies Act is one of the most most serious decisions a parliamentarian can make. I want to remind especially the NDP of this, who are supporting the Liberals in this sledgehammer approach. History will not be kind to the leader of the NDP or his members on this particular question. The Emergencies Act predecessor, the War Measures Act, was only used 3 times: World War I, World War II, and the FLQ crisis. Colleagues, we should keep these precedents in mind. The weight of those events should caution us against making this decision lightly. These protests have caused disruptions for many Canadians, especially local businesses and residents of Ottawa. As I have said, Conservatives are the party of law and order. We believe the trucks should move or be moved. But, Mr. Speaker, we want to lower the temperature across the country. The Prime Minister clearly wants to raise it. Let's be very clear how this all started. The Prime Minister decided to impose a vaccine mandate on truckers with no scientific evidence that it was the right thing to do. Many Canadians opposed it, but he went ahead anyway. Truckers and millions of Canadians felt they had no recourse with this Prime Minister, and who can blame them? After all, this was the Prime Minister who called them racist and misogynist. He said their views were unacceptable, that they were on the fringe. And when truckers and their supporters arrived in Ottawa, what did the Prime Minister do first? He hid for a week, and then he continued his insults, calling them and anyone who supported them or even talked with them things like Nazi supporters. We saw that name-calling and unfair and mean-spirited characterization happen just yesterday, Mr. Speaker, by the Prime Minister of Canada in this House. That is all he has done to rectify the problem: call names and insult. Mr. Speaker, many of the people that are protesting, many of the people who are upset are our neighbours. They are our constituents. They are Canadians, and they want to be heard and given even just a little respect by their Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister has decided that because he disagrees with them, doesn't like their opinions, he won't hear them. At every turn, the Prime Minister has stigmatized, wedged, divided, and traumatized Canadians. And now, without even a single meeting with a trucker, without talking through one of their concerns, without apologizing for his insults and listening to what people have to say, without using any other tool at his disposal, he has used this overreach, this Emergencies Act, and it's wrong. The Prime Minister's leadership in this situation has frankly been abysmal. He said this week, and I quote, "Invoking the Emergencies Act is never the first thing a government should do, or even the second. The Act has to be used sparingly and as a last resort." But his actions have shown the opposite approach. The so-called measure of last resort has come before taking any action to address the frustrations at the root of the protest. How did the Prime Minister go directly from ignoring the truckers to turning this to the Emergencies Act? Why has the government jumped straight to this without doing anything to lower the temperature first? Conservatives put forward a reasonable approach that could help bring the temperature down and address the concerns. We asked the government to commit publicly to a specific plan and timeline to roll back federal mandates and restrictions. But the Liberals and NDP refused to support our plan, and instead the Prime Minister reached for more power. This comes as provincial governments are announcing plans to end COVID-19 restrictions. The Prime Minister is an exception to this trend, and he refuses to come forward with a plan. Even the provinces are unhappy with the Prime Minister for doing this. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Quebec, Nova Scotia, they're all opposed to the use of the Emergencies Act. This is not a good look for the Prime Minister. We all want the trucks here in Ottawa to move. We want a peaceful and quick end to the trucks blocking the streets in Ottawa. Our message to those protesting is still this: Conservatives have heard you. We will keep standing up for you. But it's time to move the trucks. At the same time, no government should resort to the kind of extreme measures that we're seeing. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister has a track record of serious disregard for the law, and that raises a lot of red flags. This is the Prime Minister who interfered with an ongoing criminal trial in the SNC-Lavalin scandal. This is a Prime Minister who took the Speaker to court instead of fulfilling his legal obligation to provide documents to this Parliament. On 2 separate occasions, this is the Prime Minister who has been found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner. This Prime Minister admitted his basic admiration for basic dictatorships. Red flag after red flag after red flag. He may not like it, Mr. Speaker, but in Canada, civil liberties must be defended at every turn. Section 2 guarantees our freedom of association and assembly. Section 7 guarantees our right to life, liberty, and security of the person. Section 8 guarantees our protection against unreasonable search and seizure. Canadians can't be expected to simply take this Prime Minister at his word. His plans are not consistent with fundamental freedoms. The government should not have the power to close the bank accounts of Canadians on a whim. The Prime Minister is doing this to save his own political skin, but Mr. Speaker, this is not a game. It comes at the cost to Canadians' rights and freedoms. Speaker, Parliament should not allow the Prime Minister to avoid responsibility in this way. I urge all members of this House, proceed with extreme caution. Now is the time to stand up for your constituents, to show real leadership, to help heal our divisions, to listen to those we disagree with, to not shut them down, to not tell them that they are irrelevant, to not speak insults to them. That is the job of each one of us as members of Parliament. No matter who we represent, we have to represent them with integrity, with hope, with honor. And what the Prime Minister is doing, Mr. Speaker, he has for the last 2 years disregarded these Canadians, called them names and insulted them. It is time to show leadership for every one of us and say no to this Emergencies Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now I will speak on behalf of my constituents, which all of you are sworn to do. I just ask the members opposite. If this kind of occupation was happening in their neighborhoods, in their ridings, for 4 weeks in a row, for 4 weeks in a row, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I just want to say the longer I get to stand here, the less option that people have to actually present their feelings and represent their constituents later on. We good? The Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre.
4 weeks in a row, Speaker, and the members opposite talk about listening to the protesters. They won't even listen to a member of this House to understand, Speaker, what my constituents, the members of my community is going. And when did the line cross between being a lawful protest, which we welcome actually, Speaker, in this riding, and it happens all the time, to an illegal protest? Members opposite were out there taking photos and encouraging those protesters to keep honking in the middle of the night. Would the member now denounce those actions?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
That's a very good question for his leader, the Prime Minister. When these protests started, the first thing this Prime Minister did was call these people names. He insulted them. I don't think anyone in that member's constituency thinks that the answer for a Prime Minister the response for a Prime Minister to do is to hide and then hurl huge insults, not just saying he disagrees with them, calling them misogynist, racist, their fringe view, they should not be tolerated. So very good question he should ask his own Prime Minister. Why didn't he take action? Why didn't he show leadership? Why didn't he take the high road and try to at least listen to these folks so that they felt that they were respected? Good question for your boss.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. L'honorable député de la Prairie.
Les problèmes à casse en Alberta se sont réglés sans la loi des mesures d'urgence. À Emerson, même chose, sans la loi des mesures d'urgence, ça s'est réglé. Sur le pont des ambassadeurs, évidemment, il a fallu que les Américains écrivent, ça n'avait pas de bon sens, ça s'est réglé. Sans la loi des mesures d'urgence. À Québec, il y a eu des manifestations, ça s'est réglé. Sans la loi des mesures d'urgence. Dans la cour du premier ministre, ici, dans les 95 il y a une occupation.
there is an occupation. What did the Prime Minister do? First, he insulted them, and then he invoked the Emergencies Act. My question is simple. Between playing Pontius Pilate and the atomic bomb, there is tools that the Prime Minister could have used, like leadership. What does the Leader of the Opposition think of that? The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I'll tell that member thank you for his question. He may recall I sent a letter very early on to the Prime Minister asking that he meet with the opposition leaders to talk about solutions like the ones that he just spoke about. It's clear that the borders were cleared by police action, and that's a good thing. We believe that these protesters here in Ottawa, these blockades, could have been moved quickly had the Prime Minister shown some leadership, said, hey, I'm hearing you, I disagree with you, but I hear your concerns. We're going to look at removing these mandates. We're going to do it because it's actually scientific to remove them. I guarantee you, Mr. Speaker, that these folks would have moved on had the Prime Minister decided he wanted to actually listen. And what I promise you is we would not be here today invoking an Emergencies Act, which is a sledgehammer on all Canadians.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
It's no secret that the convoy stated their mission, which was to overthrow the government. It sounds ludicrous, but they brazenly posted that on their website, and they reiterated it.
Order. I can't hear the question, and I'm sure the Leader of the Opposition can't hear the question. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
It's no secret that the goal of this convoy, posted brazenly on their website, reiterated as recently as earlier this week in a press conference, was to overthrow a democratically elected government. That was their goal. So the interim leader of the Conservative Party says, we have heard you, we will keep standing up for you. Do you regret endorsing a convoy that is attacking the fundamental democracy of our country? Do you regret endorsing and supporting an occupation that has harassed citizens? Do you regret endorsing a movement which has lost...
Order. I know the questions have to come through the chair, and then I can't speak on behalf of the Leader of the Opposition, but I'll let the Leader of the Opposition answer the question.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And obviously, nobody in this House believes that a government should be overthrown, although I have seen that member's colleagues at a number of pro-communist marches, and so not sure if that means he endorses communism. But I'll tell you what I know is when history looks back on this, Conservatives will have stood up with Canadians, millions of Canadians, vaccinated Canadians, Canadians who are blue-collar workers, Canadians who are white-collar workers, Canadians who have had enough of a Prime Minister who has divided, wedged, stigmatized, and traumatized them. And the party that will have stood with that Prime Minister is that member and his NDP colleagues, and it's shameful.
Reprise du débat, continuing debate. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Monsieur le Président, je préférerais aujourd'hui me lever en cette Chambre pour parler de la hausse de l'inflation. Je préférerais me lever en cette Chambre aujourd'hui pour défendre les mères de famille, les pères de famille, les aînés, qui ont effectivement beaucoup à souffrir depuis le début de la pandémie et qui aujourd'hui font face à toutes sortes de situations vraiment graves. Mais à cause de ce Premier ministre, à cause de l'élection du Premier ministre, parce qu'il a choisi de protéger sa carrière plutôt que d'écouter les Canadiens. On se retrouve aujourd'hui à discuter d'une loi qui a été invoquée pour la toute première fois depuis sa création en 1988 par le Parlement et par ce Premier ministre. La loi sur les mesures d'urgence. C'est un moment, Monsieur le Président, qui va s'inscrire dans notre histoire, mais pas pour les bonnes raisons. Et c'est extrêmement décevant, Monsieur le Président. Le Premier ministre a dit invoquer la loi pour gérer les barrages et les manifestations au centre-ville d'Ottawa, au poste frontalier de Coutts en Alberta, au poste frontalier d'Emerson au Manitoba, ainsi qu'au pont ambassadeur à Windsor. Je l'ai répété encore ce matin, Monsieur le Président. Chers collègues, on doit tenir compte de ces précédents. Le poids des événements nous oblige à faire preuve de prudence. Cependant, il ne reste que les barrages à Ottawa. Tous les autres barrages ont été ou se sont démantelés sans le recours à la loi sur les mesures d'urgence. Pendant 15 jours, le premier ministre n'a pris aucune mesure significative pour calmer les manifestations. Il n'a pas écouté la grogne, la fatigue et les demandes des manifestants, ni des Canadiens. Il a préféré prendre des mesures extrêmes directement. En résumé, Monsieur le Président, le premier ministre n'a tout simplement pas respecté le seuil élevé prévu par la loi sur les mesures d'urgence pour justifier son invocation et son application. Et c'est pourquoi, Monsieur le Président, les conservateurs vont voter contre sa décision. Le recours à la loi sur les mesures d'urgence est l'une des décisions les plus importantes qu'un parlementaire peut prendre. La loi sur les mesures de guerre n'a été utilisée que 3 fois. Pendant la Première Guerre mondiale, pendant la Deuxième Guerre mondiale et pendant la crise d'octobre. On se souvient bien au Québec, Monsieur le Président. C'est notre responsabilité comme parlementaires de protéger d'abord et avant tout notre démocratie. Ça comprend l'élection des élus et aussi le droit des citoyens de ne pas être d'accord avec le gouvernement et le droit de pouvoir l'exprimer publiquement, Monsieur le Président. Ces manifestations créent, on le sait, des perturbations pour de nombreux Canadiens, particulièrement pour les gens de la région d'Ottawa, pour les entreprises locales. C'est extrêmement dur pour eux. Ce sont des victimes collatérales d'une situation qui dépasse largement les rues et les citoyens d'Ottawa eux-mêmes. On en convient, Monsieur le Président. Comme on l'a souvent répété, les conservateurs sont le parti de la loi et l'ordre. Les barrages illégaux doivent prendre fin rapidement et pacifiquement. C'est le temps de calmer le jeu, Monsieur le Président. Pas seulement à Ottawa. Partout au pays. Malheureusement, comme plusieurs experts l'ont témoigné, comme plusieurs analystes l'ont constaté, les actions du premier ministre risquent d'avoir un effet tout à fait contraire. Revenons au début, Monsieur le Président. Comment ces événements ont commencé? Ça a commencé par un premier ministre qui a choisi de politiser une élection, de déclencher une élection en pleine pandémie. Par la suite, qui a décidé d'obliger les camionneurs à se faire vacciner sans aucune preuve scientifique que c'était la bonne chose à faire, Monsieur le Président. On a posé la question au gouvernement, on a posé la question au ministre de la Santé. Sur quel témoignage d'experts vous vous basez pour obliger les camionneurs à se faire vacciner? On a toujours éludé la question. On n'a jamais répondu du côté du gouvernement, Monsieur le Président. Mais on n'a pas reculé. On a maintenu cette obligation-là, malgré tous les problèmes que ça causait à notre économie, à la chaîne d'approvisionnement et toute l'ampleur du mouvement que ça a créé, Monsieur le Président. Quand les manifestants sont arrivés à Ottawa, le premier ministre s'est caché pendant une semaine. Monsieur le Président. Pour ensuite n'ont pas essayé de calmer le jeu, insulter les manifestants, insulter les Canadiens qui ne pensaient pas comme lui, Monsieur le Président. C'est ça qui est arrivé. Il a dit qu'ils étaient racistes, misogynes. Il a même affirmé que leur point de vue était inacceptable. Mais ça, on le voit souvent à cette Chambre, Monsieur le Président. Chaque fois qu'on dit quelque chose dont le premier ministre n'est pas tout à fait d'accord, on voit tout de suite que pour lui, c'est pas acceptable. Il y a plus de la moitié des Canadiens qui n'ont pas voté pour lui à la dernière élection. Et pourtant, ce sont des Canadiens, ce sont des gens qui ont droit à leurs opinions, ce sont des Canadiens qui se sont exprimés et qui continuent d'avoir le droit de le faire. C'est acceptable de voter contre le premier ministre, Monsieur le Président. J'ai entendu ses points de vue partout, dans mon comté, sur les médias sociaux, au téléphone, dans les courriels. On en a reçu plein de courriels cette semaine, Monsieur le Président. Ces gens qui s'expriment sont nos voisins, nos électeurs. C'est des Canadiens qui veulent se faire entendre. Ils devraient être entendus. Mais comme le premier ministre n'est pas d'accord avec eux, Monsieur le Président, il n'aime pas leur opinion, il a décidé tout simplement de ne pas les écouter. Chaque fois qu'il en a l'occasion, le premier ministre stigmatise et divise les Canadiens. On sait qu'il n'a pas rencontré aucun camionneur, aucun représentant de leurs associations. Il n'a pas discuté avec eux de leurs préoccupations.
He didn't discuss
C'est même pas excusé, M. le Président, pour ses insultes,
He didn't
qu'il
even
a envoyé
apologize for his
dehors
insults,
à tous ces manifestants,
insulted all
qu'il a
the
fait ici même en cette
protesters,
Chambre,
and
M.
he's
le
insulted
Président.
people in
Les
this House,
excuses,
Mr.
M. le
Speaker.
Président, pour le Premier
You know,
ministre, c'est pas
apologies
pour
from
ceux
the
qui
Prime
pensent pas comme
Minister,
lui.
it's not for people.
Il a
He
ignoré ce
doesn't
que les
give
gens ont à
them
dire.
to people
Il a
who
attendu que la
disagree with
crise
him.
empire.
He heard that the crisis was getting worse, so
Il
he
aurait
just
pu
stayed hidden.
intervenir.
He
Il
could
avait
have
beaucoup d'outils à
intervened.
sa
He had a
disposition pour
lot of tools at
intervenir.
his disposal to
Premièrement, le
intervene.
premier outil, c'est
The
lui-même.
first tool is
Comme Premier
himself.
ministre, comme chef d'État,
You know,
il
he's the
aurait
head
pu
of state.
écouter les Canadiens,
He could
Monsieur
have
le Président.
listened to
Le
Canadians.
premier outil dont il
That
aurait
is
pu
the
avoir
very
recours,
first thing
c'est
that he should
lui-même
have
comme
done.
chef d'État.
That's the first
Il a
option he
choisi
should have
d'agir
used as head of
en
state.
petit
To
politicien,
choose
Monsieur
to
le Président.
act. He should have acted like a statesman, but he
Au lieu
didn't.
d'écouter, il a
So
décidé
instead
de
of
se donner
listening,
plus de
he
pouvoir.
decided
Il a
to give
décidé
himself more powers.
d'élargir les pouvoirs du
He
gouvernement.
decided to broaden
Monsieur le
the
Président,
government's
c'est une
powers, Mr.
mauvaise
Speaker.
décision.
That is a bad decision.
Le leadership du Premier ministre
The Prime
est
Minister's
carrément
leadership
lamentable dans cette
is
situation.
miserable.
Cette
It's
semaine,
pathetic
il a
in
même
this
dit, je le cite,
situation. And this week he
l'invocation
even
de la loi
said,
sur les mesures d'urgence n'est
invoking
jamais
the
la première
Emergencies
chose que le
Act is
gouvernement
never
devrait
the
faire,
first
même
thing
pas
that
la
the government
deuxième.
should do.
La loi doit
It
être
shouldn't be the
utilisée
second or the
avec
third option.
modération et en
It should
dernier
be
recours.
used with moderation
Monsieur
and
le
as a
Président,
last resort, Mr. Speaker. That's what he said.
Personne pense que
No
le
one
Premier ministre a même
thinks
utilisé la première,
that the Prime
la
Minister
deuxième,
used any
ni
kind
même
of
la
first or
troisième,
second
ni
or
même la
third
quatrième
option
option,
or
Monsieur le
fourth
Président.
option even.
Il n'a pas réussi à convaincre
Has
personne
not
de la
succeeded in
justification
convincing
du recours
anyone
à la loi
that
sur
it
les
is
mesures
justified
d'urgence,
for him to
alors
resort
que
to the Emergencies
à peu
Act.
près tout le monde, Monsieur le Président, tous
Mr.
les
Speaker,
experts, les
just about
analystes, les chefs de
everyone,
police,
experts,
tout le monde a dit
police
qu'ils avaient les
chiefs,
recours, tous les
analysts,
outils
everyone
nécessaires.
said that he
Les premiers
had
ministres
all
des
the tools at
provinces,
his
les premiers
disposal.
ministres des
Even the
provinces, Monsieur le
premiers
Président,
didn't
le
want him
disent,
to
ils
use
l'ont
the
répété.
Emergencies Act.
On est capable
They've
de
said it
s'en
over and
occuper.
over.
Ne
We
venez
can
pas
look
mettre
after
de l'huile
this.
sur le feu,
Do
Monsieur le
not
Président,
throw oil on
en
the
faisant
fire.
ce que vous avez
That's what they
fait,
said.
c'est-à-dire en invoquant la loi sur les
By
mesures
invoking the
d'urgence. C'est ça
Emergencies
qui est
Act,
arrivé, Monsieur
that's
le
what you're
Président.
doing. That's what they told
Comment
him,
le
Mr.
Premier ministre
Speaker.
est-il passé directement de l'ignorance
How did the
totale
Prime Minister go
des
completely
manifestants
from
à l'adoption de la
ignoring
loi
the
sur les mesures
protesters and hiding
d'urgence?
to the nuclear
On
option of
espère que
adopting the
l'histoire
Emergencies
va le
Act?
dire, Monsieur le
We
Président,
hope
parce que
that history
présentement,
will
le Premier
tell us
ministre et ses ministres
why this
ne le
happened,
disent
because
pas.
currently
Et
the Prime Ministers
malheureusement,
and his
Monsieur le
ministers
Président,
are not
la
telling
crise
us
dans
why,
laquelle on est
and currently
actuellement
the
est
crisis that
directement
we're
créée
in
par le
has
manque de
been
leadership du Premier
directly created by the
Les
leadership
conservateurs avaient
void, the
présenté une
vacuum
option,
left by the Prime
une approche
Minister.
raisonnable. On demandait au Premier
He could have used
ministre,
a reasonable
présentez-nous un
approach.
plan.
We said,
Un plan
we asked him,
pour
give us a
annoncer
plan,
le retrait
a
des
plan
obligations vaccinales
to
obligatoires.
announce
Un plan
the
pour la fin des
withdrawal, the
mesures
lifting
sanitaires.
of
Puis c'est pas
obligatory
déraisonnable, ça,
vaccination
Monsieur le
and the
Président.
lifting of health
Toutes les provinces
restrictions.
sont en train
And
de
that's
le
not
faire. Tous
unreasonable.
les autres
All the
gouvernements au
provinces
Canada
are
sont
doing
en train
it
de faire
right
ça.
now across the
Malheureusement, ce
country.
Premier
But
ministre
unfortunately,
a
this
choisi
Prime
de
Minister
s'entêter
chose
et de
to put his head
ne
down,
rien faire, de ne
to
pas
do
écouter ses
nothing,
experts, Monsieur le Président.
to not listen to the
Il se
experts, to ignore
surprendra
them.
aujourd'hui pourquoi les
And now he's wondering
manifestants, les Canadiens,
why the
n'en
protesters
peuvent
and
plus
why
de son manque de
Canadians are
leadership,
fed
Monsieur le
up
Président.
with his
C'est la
lack of
réalité dans
leadership.
laquelle on est
That's the
actuellement.
reality in which we
Le
find
Premier ministre
ourselves.
préfère faire à sa
The
tête,
Prime
il
Minister
continue de
would
refuser de
rather
présenter un plan.
do what he thinks
Monsieur le
is
Président,
right and continues to refuse to give us a
le
plan.
gouvernement ne devrait pas avoir
Mr.
le pouvoir
Speaker,
de
the
fermer des
government
comptes
should
bancaires des
not
Canadiens. Le
have the
gouvernement ne
power to
devrait
shut
pas
down
avoir à
Canadians'
recourir à la
bank
loi sur les
accounts.
mesures
It
d'urgence
should
quand il
not
existe
have to
d'autres
resort to the
outils pour
Emergencies
régler
Act
des
when there
situations comme
exist
celles qui
other
existent
tools
présentement à
to
Ottawa, Monsieur
fix
le
this
Président.
type of
Le
crisis in
Premier ministre
Ottawa.
a échoué.
The Prime Minister has
Malheureusement,
failed
le Premier
miserably.
ministre sera jugé
And
pas par
unfortunately,
nous,
he will be
par
judged
les
not by
générations de
us,
Canadiens qui
but
vont
by
suivre.
the generations of Canadians to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député de Kings Hands.
For Kings Hands.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you,
et
Mr.
je
Speaker.
veux remercier mon collègue
And I'd like
opposé
to
pour
thank
son
my
discours.
colleague across the way for his
Le
speech.
député face aime parler de leadership. Son parti essaie de chevaucher une ligne de soutien aux blocages illégaux et les dénoncer en même temps. Le député de Lambton Kent Middlesex a suggéré que le Premier ministre devrait faire preuve de leadership et faire ce que les manifestants illégaux voulaient au complet. Quelles mesures le gouvernement aurait-il de prendre selon Louis, ou le gouvernement devrait simplement faire exactement les demandes de les protesteurs, les manifestants illégaux?
Demands. What does the member think?
L'honorable député de Mégantic-Lérable.
The honorable member. Mr. Speaker,
à ce que je sache,
as far as I know,
l'opposition officielle et
unfortunately, the
l'opposition
official
officielle.
opposition
On a
is
un premier
the official
ministre
opposition.
qui avait
We
entre
have
les
a prime
mains
minister who had at his disposal the tools he needed to cooperate with the provinces to send additional police forces to Ottawa when Ottawa asked for it. There were ministers who could have intervened who did not do so. So the question that the member is asking right now to the official opposition, well, he should ask his own ministers, his own prime minister, why was nothing done at the very beginning of this crisis that would have calmed things down? The lack of leadership isn't on this side, Mr. Speaker. It's across the way.
Question et commentaire. L'honorable député de l'Avignon,
Matane-Matapédia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's something that makes me angry. When the Prime Minister said that he invoked the Emergencies Act, he said, well, it's going to be geographically targeted, just where we need to apply it. But Premier Legault said, we don't want anything to do with this act on our territory. The National Assembly voted unanimously. We want nothing to do with this. But now we can see that it's localized across Canada. And it's not the first time that the Prime Minister has said one thing and done the opposite. So I would like to know whether he thinks this is a reasonable type of application of this law, or is it unjustified and unjustifiable? The honourable member.
Je vais citer le premier ministre du
I'm going
Québec.
to quote
Imposer la loi risque de mettre de l'huile sur le feu
Imposing this
en polarisant
act
davantage
will
la
throw oil
population.
on the fire by
J'ai été clair avec le premier
polarizing
ministre,
all
la loi fédérale
Quebecers.
d'urgence ne doit pas s'appliquer au
It
Québec. Je
should
pense
not
que nous n'en
apply to
avons pas
Quebec
besoin. Je pense
because
qu'en
we
ce
don't
moment,
need it. I
ça
think that
n'aiderait
right
pas le
now
climat
it
social,
would
Monsieur
not
le
help the
Président.
social
J'ai
climate.
des
That's what the
citations
Premier
comme ça
said.
de
I
la
have
première ministre
quotes
du
like
Manitoba,
that from the Premier of
du premier ministre
Manitoba,
de l'île du
from the Premier of Prince Edward Island, from the Premier of Alberta. I think it's pretty clear. The Prime Minister, what Premier Legault said, listen, we don't want anything to do with your Emergencies Act. We can look after this all by ourselves. So why isn't he able to do so?
Question et commentaire, questions and comments. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, and to the honourable member for Megan T. Care, I'm actually raising a point that I've heard his leader, the official leader of the opposition, the leader of the opposition party, raise something as a hypothetical, and I want to address it now, and that is this notion that the Prime Minister hid. I think we forget the Prime Minister, and I'm not going to defend all the Prime Minister's actions by any means, but at the moment this convoy started, the Prime Minister had been diagnosed with positive for COVID. Had he gone in to meet with people who were unvaccinated, and had any of them been sickened and died, he could have been charged with manslaughter. Does that not occur to people on the other side as a...
Order. I would really like to hear the... I'm just looking over to the minister. The member completed her question?
No, it's Zoom right there.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure everybody listens to the question so that we can get a good answer on it. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Island.
Speaker, I know this is a difficult time for everyone, but I think that hypothetical and the use of the word hid is again inflaming divisions in this place we shouldn't have. If someone tests positive for COVID, they should not be meeting with anyone, and they certainly shouldn't be threatening the health and safety of people who have chosen not to get vaccinated.
L'honorable député de Mégantic-Lérable.
Honourable member for Mégantic-Lérable.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker,
depuis le début de la pandémie,
from the beginning of the
j'ai eu
pandemic,
l'occasion, je ne sais pas à combien de reprises,
I don't know how many
d'assister à des
opportunities
discours
to
et à des présentations
listen to speeches
de mon
and
honorable collègue
presentations
sur un petit appareil qui
from my
s'appelle
honourable
Zoom,
colleague
un
on
petit
this little
ordinateur.
platform, this
J'ai
little
eu
computer
l'occasion de
called Zoom.
l'entendre à plusieurs
I've
reprises
heard her on
défendre le
many
gouvernement libéral
occasions,
sur ce petit écran,
and
Monsieur le
also
Président.
members of the Liberal Party on
Se
this small
cacher, ça veut
screen
dire pas
using
répondre aux
Zoom.
questions.
So hiding
Ça veut
means not
dire
answering questions.
ne pas vouloir
Hiding means
prendre position.
not taking a
C'est ce que le
stance.
Premier ministre a fait en se
That's
cachant,
what the
Monsieur le
Prime
Président.
Minister
Il s'est
did
caché
when he hid.
de ses
He shirked
responsabilités.
his
Il
responsibilities.
s'est pas caché chez eux. Il
He
s'est caché de
didn't
ses
hide at home.
responsabilités.
He shirked his
Il aurait pu parler. Il
responsibilities.
avait tous les
He
moyens de
could
le faire.
have taken the floor because he had all the means he needed to do so.
Reprise du débat, continuing debate. L'honorable député de
The honourable
Belleuil-Chambly.
member for Belleuil-Chambly.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker,
permettez-moi d'abord de rappeler
please allow me to
aux amis
remind
d'en face
our friends across the
que
way
nous sommes en pandémie
that we're in the midst of a pandemic.
et de rappeler aux amis de droite que
And,
j'aimerais m'entendre moi-même.
I'd like to remind the Conservative Party that I'd like to be able to hear
A
myself as
fait
well.
des victimes.
The
Il y a des gens qui sont morts. Il y a des gens qui ont eu des ennuis de santé majeurs, extrêmement significatifs. Il y a des gens qui vivent dans l'angoisse. Il y a des gens qui ont vu leur pouvoir d'achat sérieusement réduit à cause des effets inflationnistes durables ou temporaires, structurels ou conjoncturels de la pandémie. La pandémie s'est attaquée gravement aux aînés. La pandémie s'est attaquée gravement au système de santé du Québec et des provinces. Bien sûr, devant une situation inusitée, sans précédent, on peut y aller parfois un peu à tâtons. On essaie, on n'a pas un succès immédiat. Et parfois, ces essais et erreurs peuvent semer le doute. Je le comprends. C'est vrai au niveau des contraintes sanitaires. C'est vrai au niveau des mesures de santé autour de la notion de vaccination et de l'encadrement que ça a recommandé. C'est vrai au niveau des contraintes dans les déplacements qui ont été imposés. Et ça s'explique et ça se comprend. La réponse à tout ça, c'est toujours et ça doit être l'information. Même si le succès de l'information et de la diffusion des bonnes informations reste relatif. Malheureusement, la gestion de la pandémie a été gérée d'une façon qui était, comment dire, intoxiquée par une obsession. L'obsession de s'accaparer des pouvoirs du Québec et des provinces. L'obsession d'imposer des conditions en dehors de ces juridictions. L'obsession d'assujettir la pandémie, même la pandémie, à des valeurs multiculturalistes. Et tout ça, ça crée des retards dans la compréhension, ça crée de l'incompréhension chez les citoyens, tant du Québec et du Canada, alors que ce dont on a besoin, c'est d'informations de qualité. Ça a aussi été, Monsieur le Président, la graine, la semence des oppositions qui ont émergé sous les formes que l'on découvre depuis quelques semaines. Monsieur le Président, la peur est légitime. Le doute est légitime. L'opposition aux idées ou aux politiques d'un gouvernement, c'est légitime. Le dire est légitime. Le manifester est légitime. Se rassembler pour le manifester est légitime. La sédition et l'insurrection ne sont pas légitimes. Refuser le traitement est-il légitime? Mettre en péril la vie d'autrui en refusant un traitement ou un vaccin est-il légitime? Hier, j'ai été vacciné pour la troisième fois, librement. C'était ma liberté. Et ce faisant, je protégeais et je contribuais à rétablir la liberté d'autres gens plus fragiles qui attendent le sentiment de sécurité qu'ils devraient et elles devraient avoir en sortant de chez eux, en particulier les résidences pour personnes âgées. La liberté est une question d'équilibre. Équilibre entre la liberté individuelle et la liberté collective. Le jugement, à cet égard, demande du jugement. Et ce n'est pas au menu du jour dans tous les partis. La liberté pose un test de leadership. Le test de la liberté que le premier ministre a échoué. Pourquoi? Par idéologie. Pour assujettir les libertés collectives aux libertés individuelles. Pour écraser l'identité d'une nation sous celle de toutes les nations. Pour nier la nation. Pour parler d'un État post-national. C'est continuer l'œuvre paternelle, nier le Québec, achever l'œuvre civilisatrice de banaliser la nation québécoise. Ce fut l'objet, parlant liberté, de la Charte des droits, celle des droits individuels, celle qui nie le français, celle qui nie la laïcité, celle qui nie la liberté d'enseignement, celle qui envisage de censurer les réseaux. Fût-il, comment dire, un caniveau d'injures alarmant ces temps-ci, reste que c'est un lieu d'expression libre sous réserve de la propagande haineuse. La Charte nie les droits collectifs. Elle nie l'identité collective, elle nie la nation. Alors tout naturellement, le premier ministre se porte à la défense des individus, puis il l'échappe. La liberté devient liberté. Alimentée par la peur, le doute, une information insuffisante. La liberté prend des airs de l'extrême droite.
looks like something the right wing would use.
Elle alimente la désobéissance civile. Elle flirte avec la violence.
And it flirts
Elle
with
pollue
violence.
les réseaux sociaux.
In addition, it's
Mais le Premier
polluting
ministre
social media.
C'est dans sa nature, pendant de crise,
the Prime Minister,
activement
what he likes
rien.
to do is
C'est dans sa nature idéologique.
It is in his
Mépriser
ideological nature to scorn and inflame differences.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, il l'échappe. Ottawa est assiégé.
Ottawa is under siege.
Le drapeau auquel le Premier ministre est associé flirte avec les pires.
Prime Minister
il doit agir, mais il ignore comment.
But he has to take action, but he doesn't know how to do this.
Alors il fait semblant d'agir.
So he's pretending to take action.
Un spectacle.
He's putting
il
on a show.
détourne l'attention. Il camoufle son échec. Il dépose une émotion aussi lourde qu'inutile. Héritage maquillé de la loi sur les mesures de guerre. Mais Dieu merci, la copie est toujours plus pâle que l'original. Et le Premier ministre n'arrête de répéter qu'il n'y a aucune entrave aux libertés garanties par la Charte. Si la loi sur les mesures d'urgence n'entravait aucune liberté, elle n'existerait pas. Par nature, elle entrave des libertés. Et le rôle du Premier ministre n'est pas de nier qu'elle entrave des libertés, cette loi sur les mesures d'urgence, et de les justifier et de les expliquer. La loi sur les mesures d'urgence a été inutile au pont des ambassadeurs, inutile à la douane de Caus, inutile pour la saisie d'armes au même endroit, inutile au Québec. Et comble l'ironie, alors que le Québec ne veut pas l'application de la loi des mesures d'urgence sur son territoire, c'est la Sûreté du Québec qui vient en renfort à Ottawa. Mets ça dans ta pipe puis fume!
Ironically.
Et il s'engage, le Premier ministre, à circonscrire l'application en termes de lieu. Or, elle ne le fait pas. Il aura beau le répéter, elle ne le fait pas. Elle est canadienne. Elle est dans la foulée de sa tradition. Mais là aussi, en termes de tradition, Monsieur le Président, la copie est toujours plus pâle que l'original. L'Assemblée nationale n'en veut pas de cette loi. Le gouvernement du Québec n'en veut pas, évidemment. Le Bloc québécois n'en veut pas. Les conservateurs du Québec n'en veulent pas. Et je rencontre le chef du NPD cet après-midi pour en discuter. Peut-être y a-t-il moyen d'une compréhension mutuelle. Seuls les libéraux d'Ottawa n'en veulent pas parce que ceux de Québec n'en veulent pas. Si l'Ontario la veut, cette loi, ça ne la rend pas utile. Tout ça pouvait être fait autrement, mais ça leur appartient. Et le Québec, lui, clairement, n'en veut pas. Le Premier ministre a échoué au test des libertés collectives. Il a un triste bilan à cet égard. Il échoue souvent le test des libertés. Il a abandonné Raif Badawi. Il a ignoré les Ouïghours. Il est complice de l'Espagne contre la Catalogne. Il méprise les aspirations linguistiques du Québec, il méprise les aspirations laïques du Québec, il méprise la liberté d'expression et d'enseignement si elle ne pense pas et ne dit pas comme lui. Il affame les provinces qui ne respectent pas ses conditions en santé. Et même en matière de sécurité, le Premier ministre agit d'abord et avant tout par l'ingérence, par l'appropriation de pouvoirs qui ne sont pas les siens et par des interventions qui, quoi qu'il en dise, ne sont pas justifiées dans l'état actuel des choses, l'ensemble du territoire canadien, sauf la crise qu'il s'est lui-même fabriquée à Ottawa, en est témoin. Il a échoué le test de la liberté d'expression parce qu'il a livré le mot liberté à ses pires adversaires, l'extrême droite et surtout, Monsieur le Président, l'ignorance. La liberté est une valeur progressiste. La liberté est une valeur nationale. La liberté est une valeur québécoise. La liberté se nourrit de vérité. La vaccination est un outil de liberté. Imparfaite, certainement, mais encore la moins pire des solutions. Et le plus vite nous nous y serons assujettis le plus vite. L'ensemble des mesures sanitaires pourront être levées. Pire,
improve vaccination, the faster we can lift health guidelines.
Il a abandonné les malades pour gérer une crise qu'il a à toute fin pratique créée.
To manage a crisis that
Moi,
he
Monsieur le
himself
Président, je
created.
défendrai toujours la
I will
liberté,
always defend freedom,
surtout
Mr.
celle
Speaker,
de ma nation.
particularly those from
Comme
my
dans
nation.
le Québec est libre de ses choix.
Quebec is free to make its choices. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Kings Heads.
Monsieur le Président,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Le chef du Bloc québécois
The leader of the
compare
Bloc
cette
Québécois
mesure
is
d'une
comparing
décret
this
d'urgence publique à celle
measure
de loi sur les mesures de guerre,
the War Measures
ce qui
Act,
n'est pas le cas.
which is not the
Son
case.
porte-parole en matière de
His
sécurité publique a
public
suggéré
security
que cette
critic has
mesure
suggested
supprime le
that
droit
this
garanti
measures
par la Charte, qui ce n'est
does
pas
not
le cas.
respect charter rights, which is
Cette
not the
ordonnance donne
case.
simplement à la police et aux autorités provinciales de pouvoirs
It is up to
supplémentaires
police
pour faire le
and
travail, y compris le
provincial
suivi de contributions
law authority. It
financières
gives them
aux
additional
activités
powers so that they
illégales,
can
incluant au Québec,
end illegal
cause
activity, even
des
in
dommages
Quebec,
économiques.
and
Normalement,
prevent
le
economic
Bloc
damage. Normally, the
appréciait
Bloc
l'idée de pouvoir
would
discrétionnaire
appreciate the idea
provincial.
to have
Pourquoi
provincial
sont-ils
discretion.
contre une mesure
Why
raisonnable
is the Bloc
et
against
proportionnelle
a
pour leur
reasonable
province
and proportional
maintenant?
measure for that province?
L'honorable député de
The honourable member for
Belleuil-Chambly.
Il y a une
Belleuil-Chambly.
grande différence
There's a big
entre
difference
offrir des
between
pouvoirs
offering
supplémentaires à
additional
d'autres
powers
juridictions
to other
et
jurisdictions
s'emparer des
and
pouvoirs d'autres
grabbing
juridictions pour les
powers
donner
from other
à sa
jurisdictions
propre
to give you
police.
to your own.
Et ça, encore une fois,
To yourself.
c'est une espèce
And once again,
d'exercice de gymnastique
this
à
is
laquelle
kind
le
of a
gouvernement se prête avec des arabesques à côté desquels le
tricky
patinage
exercise that
artistique
the
à
government is
Beijing fait
taking.
pâle figure. Et l'autre élément, Monsieur le Président,
And Mr. Speaker,
c'est que lorsque des mesures sont
and
nécessaires
when
et
measures
lorsque des mesures
are
sont
necessary
pertinentes
and they are relevant
et qu'elles ont pour effet
and they
d'altérer
do
des libertés,
alter liberties,
plutôt que de prétendre qu'elles n'altèrent pas des libertés,
instead of saying
on
that they
l'explique,
don't
on le
affect our
justifie.
freedoms,
Allez me
we
faire
have to
croire
justify it.
que ce soit justifié ou pas,
Whether it's
que
justified
saisir
or
le compte
not,
de banque de quelqu'un ou l'empêcher
seizing
de
someone's
circuler
bank
dans une
account
rue
or
donnée,
preventing them
ce n'est
from
pas
going
altérer
down the
les libertés
street,
de quelqu'un.
that's not altering
À un moment
someone's
donné, il y a
freedom.
des évidences.
Some,
Ce
at
gouvernement
certain
est passé
point,
maître
it's
dans
clear
l'art de prétendre
that
le
this
contraire
government
de l'évidence et de se le
often says the
répéter
opposite of
entre
what
eux.
is obvious.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. L'honorable député de
The honourable member for
Charlebourg-Saint-Charles.
Charlebourg-Saint-Charles.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you,
J'aimerais
Mr.
demander au chef
Speaker.
du Bloc
I'd
québécois
like to ask the leader
ce
of the
qu'il
Bloc
pense de
Québécois, what does he
l'évaluation
think
actuelle
about
de la balance entre la loi
balance
disponible et les capacités et les
the law
ressources.
and the
On voit
capacity and the
actuellement que le
resources that are
problème
available.
majeur
We've seen a
pour la
major
ville d'Ottawa,
issue for the city
c'est
of
la
Ottawa
capacité
is in
d'enlever
terms
les camions
of
remorques, ce qui
the
cause le plus grand problème au-delà
capacity
de
of
tout le reste.
removing all these
Est-ce
tractor
qu'il comprend?
trailers.
Est-ce qu'il sait que l'article 129 du Code
Does he
criminel
know that Section 21 of the Criminal
les compagnies de
Code
transport, par exemple,
obliges
à fournir des ressources aux policiers
transportation
quand ils font la demande?
companies to
Et,
provide the
en
police
bout de
with
ligne,
resources when
est-ce
they're
qu'encore une
asked?
fois,
And once
il y a
again,
eu un manque au niveau de
does
la
he agree that
balance
there's
entre
been
la loi
a lack
qui
of balance
existe,
between
les ressources et
existing
capacités
law
disponibles?
and
Merci.
available capacities and resources? The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly.
Sauf peut-être sur une lumière rouge pendant 1 minute et demie.
Except,
Immobiliser un poids lourd sur la ligne blanche au
well,
milieu
if
de
you
la
want
rue,
to
c'est illégal.
immobilize
Tu pars de même.
tractor
Ces
trailer,
gens-là annoncent à
unless you
l'avance
have
que
the
c'est
police
leur
involved, it
intention.
can be illegal.
Tu les laisses s'en venir. La police d'Ottawa
The
capote
Ottawa
un peu,
police
demande de l'aide.
has asked
Tu
for
leur en donnes
assistance
pas.
since they're overwhelmed.
Tu dis, oh,
and
on va
then you
envoyer
don't give them that help.
275
You say
policiers,
that we're going
policières de la
to send
GRC. Tes réserves autour du
RCMP
Parlement puis au premier ministre qui commence à
and-
trouver ça compliqué de circuler. Ça lui
And
tente
the
moyen de venir autour
Prime
du
Minister
Parlement.
starts to find things that
Le
are getting
premier ministre dit
complicated. And
lui-même
he himself has
que la
said
police d'Ottawa
that
a tous les
Ottawa
pouvoirs
police has
nécessaires
all the
pour
necessary
intervenir
power to
jusqu'à ce qu'il se
intervene
rende compte que ce qu'il dit n'a pas de
until
bon
he
sens.
realized what he said didn't make sense.
Il existe en effet, à même les pouvoirs des provinces, des corps policiers,
Provinces
des
have
capacités
powers
législatives,
and they have legislative
les lois sur les états
abilities.
d'urgence des différentes
There are
juridictions, tous
emergency
les
acts
outils
in various
nécessaires. Alors qu'on arrête de
jurisdictions,
dire
and
sans
it gives
ça,
them
ça se
all the
pourrait pas, puis que là,
necessary
les gens ont peur, puis ils encouragent
tools.
le
We shouldn't say
recours à la loi
without
sur les mesures d'urgence.
this,
Les provinces
such laws
pouvaient
wouldn't exist.
et
The
peuvent
province
intervenir.
could
La
have
preuve a été
intervened
faite
and can.
partout, sauf ici,
They could have
autour
done
du
that
Parlement.
everywhere except for here around the Parliament.
Questions et commentaires. Questions Questions and comments. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you,
Merci
Mr. Speaker.
à
I'd like to
l'honorable
thank
chef
the
du
honorable
Bloc
leader of the
québécois.
Bloc
J'ai une
Québécois.
question parce que
I
je
have a
suis
question
inquiète
because I am concerned
avec les règlements qui sont présentés aujourd'hui
with the
sur l'urgence et les questions géographiques. La
and the law
régulation
and
ici
the geographical issue.
manque un
What we
référence
have in front of
clair
us
à une
lacks
région
a clear
géographique.
reference to a geographical
Hier, le
region.
Premier
Yesterday, the
ministre et
Prime
les autres
Minister
ministres
and other
ont
ministers
dit que
said
l'utilisation
that
d'urgence,
the use
la loi
of
sur l'urgence,
the Emergencies
va
Act
inclure
will
une
include
limite géographique.
a geographical
mais je ne le
limit,
trouve pas
but I
ici.
don't find it here.
Ma question pour le,
So my
le chef,
question for the
c'est ça.
leader of the bloc
Si
is this.
le gouvernement va changer les
If the
régulations
government
avec les
amended
limites géographiques
the act with
qui
the
n'incluent
geographical limit,
la province
which
du Québec,
excluded
c'est possible
Quebec,
que le chef du Bloc
would the
québécois
leader of
pense
the
que
bloc
c'est nécessaire pour la
that would
situation
be
ici à
necessary for
Ottawa.
the situation here in Ottawa.
L'honorable député
The
de
honourable member
Belleuil-Chambly.
for
L'histoire
Belleuil-Chambly.
des quelques dernières années
Over the
enseigne
past
une
few
chose.
years, we've learned one thing,
Le principe général,
that
ce qu'on dit en général,
what we say in
est
general
moins sujet à application concrète que ce qu'on écrit.
is not always
Je
applied as
m'intéresse assez
clearly
peu,
when
par
we write it down.
expérience somme toute
I've
récente,
learned this
à ce
from
que le Premier
recent
ministre
experience.
dit.
When the
Je
Prime
regarde
Minister
ce que
says
les
something,
textes disent.
well, then I
Alors,
have to
le
look at what the
texte
text says.
dit, c'est
What does it say?
applicable
It says it's
partout
applicable
au Canada.
everywhere in
Aucune
Canada.
nuance, aucune
There's
restriction.
no
Quand ils disent, oui,
nuance
on
that
va
has
leur demander
been
leur
added or
avis.
restrictions.
C'est drôle, tout à l'heure en anglais, là,
Earlier in
il a dit
English,
qu'on allait les consulter,
they said that they would
puis qu'ils allaient peut-être
consult
collaborer, mais que s'il y avait
and
l'intention de rentrer
perhaps
quelque part, ils allaient rentrer.
well, if they wanted to
Ils
go somewhere, they
pourraient
would.
changer le texte et
They could
reconnaître les
amend the
juridictions des
text
provinces,
and
dont 7 ont dit
recognize
qu'elles ne veulent
provincial
pas l'application de ça. Mais ils devraient
And some
faire le
provinces
contraire.
said
Ils
that they
devraient
would like that.
retirer le texte
But
et
if
le
they were
remplacer
to
par un
withdraw the
texte qui
text and
dirait
replace it with
voici ce
one
qu'on
that
est
said,
capable et
here's
ce
what
qu'on est
we're
prêt à
able
faire pour
and ready
aider
to
Ottawa
do
tout de
to
suite,
help Ottawa
maintenant,
right now,
et mettre un terme au
to
spectacle de
end
camouflage politique
this
de ses
political
propres erreurs.
camouflage.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député
The
de
honourable member for
Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie.
Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie.
Ah, on vous entend pas.
We can't hear you.
Recommence.
Please start again.
Non,
We still can't hear you.
c'est le bout. On va Non, encore
Sorry.
on vous entend pas.
We still can't hear you.
Je vais aller à quelqu'un d'autre et
We'll
on
go
va
to someone else and then
revenir.
we'll try to come back to you.
The honorable member, l'honorable député
The honourable member
de
for
Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr.
Écoutez,
Speaker.
aujourd'hui, je pense que c'est
Today,
indubitablement
I
une
think
journée
it's
noire
clearly
pour la
a black day
démocratie
for democracy in
canadienne.
Canada.
Au Québec, là,
In
la
Quebec,
loi sur les mesures de guerre en 70 a
War
été vécue
Measures
comme
Act
un énorme traumatisme.
in
Il y a eu 500 personnes
1970
emprisonnées arbitrairement, des gens qui ont
the
été
result
détenus
of
pendant des semaines
resulted in
sans
great
qu'on
trauma.
leur dise
There were
leurs
people who were
droits.
wrongly
Ça
imprisoned,
rappelle des souvenirs vraiment
and
douloureux.
it
Évidemment,
recalls painful
en politique,
memories.
il y a les lois,
In policies,
il y a
there
la
is
lettre de la loi,
legislation,
il y a
there's
les
the letter of
virgules de la
law,
loi, il y
there
a
are
le
the
texte
different
de la loi, mais il y a
commas
l'esprit
and the
de la
text,
loi.
and there's
On a
also
beau
the
dire
spirit
qu'on a
of
beau
the
nous dire que
legislation.
la loi sur les mesures d'urgence,
We can
c'est
say
une loi
that the
qui n'est pas la même
Emergencies
que la loi
Act
des
is
mesures
not
de
the same
guerre,
as the
mais
War
ça
Measures
rappelle
Act,
au Québec
but
un
it
traumatisme.
reminds
C'est pour ça que mon
Quebecers
chef
of their
me
trauma.
parle du
So when
traumatisme
our leader
qui a
talks
été vécu
about
au Québec
trauma
avec la
that
loi des
was
mesures de guerre en
experienced in Quebec
1970.
because of the War Measures Act
L'honorable
in
député
1970,
de Belleuil-Chambly.
that's obvious.
Monsieur le Président, ce qui est traumatisant, c'est prendre la parole
What
après
is
le député
traumatizing
de
is
Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
Ceci étant
Speaking
dit,
after that member. J'avais demandé
but
hier
nevertheless,
au
yesterday
député du côté du gouvernement
asked the
de
member
faire
from
preuve
the
d'une espèce
government
de sensibilité.
to show some sensitivity.
Je comprends que ça viendra
I
pas
understand
facilement
that
parce que
this
quand on a
doesn't come to
demandé
them
des
easily
excuses, on
because
était
when
les
you ask for
derniers avec les
an
Acadiens à pas
apology,
avoir
well, we were
eu
the last,
d'excuses pour
along
les
with the
exactions canadiennes.
Acadians, to
Quand j'ai
receive an
demandé des
apology
excuses
from
une couple
Canada.
de mois, on nous a pratiquement ri au visage.
And
on
they
a
almost
nié
laughed at us
l'histoire.
when we asked
Fait que
for
je
one
m'attends pas à des miracles,
historically.
mais
So I'm not
soyez un
expecting
peu
any
sensibles aux
miracles.
faits
But let's be
pour
somewhat
les
sensitive
Québécois.
to the
Il y a
fact that for
effectivement
Quebecers,
une relation incertaine, non pas
there's
avec le
a
rôle
uncertain
humanitaire de
relationship,
l'armée.
not
On
with
les
the
a accueillis, on
humanitarian
était
role of the
contents, il y a plein
army.
de
Yes, we
Québécois
were
là-dedans.
happy to
Mais
see them
lorsque
at some point,
on
but
parle d'une loi
when we're talking about an
qui
act
ratatine les les libertés
that
et qui est le
shakes
rejeton au botox
freedoms
de la loi des mesures de guerre,
and that
sablé
looks
ses
like the War
coins
Measures
et par
Act,
le porteur et par la nature de la loi.
both in the
On n'aime
content
pas
of the
ça.
nature of the
Ça
act.
nous inquiète.
This
On a vécu
concerns
ça.
us. We have
Alors, un peu de
experienced this in the
compréhension,
past, so please provide some understanding.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and
On va
comments.
réessayer Rosemont, la petite patrie.
La petite patrie.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank
Président.
you, Mr. Speaker.
Parfait. On est d'accord sur le fait que la loi ne devrait pas être appliquée au territoire québécois parce qu'il n'y a pas moyen de le faire. On était prêts à appuyer la motion de bloc hier là-dessus avant qu'elle soit bloquée par les libéraux. Là où j'ai un malaise, Monsieur le Président, avec le discours du chef du bloc, c'est les amalgames historiques douteux à notre égard. Utiliser des souvenirs douloureux, le traumatisme de la loi des mesures de guerre au Québec, alors qu'il n'y a pas de commune mesure avec la loi actuelle et ce qui s'est passé il y a une cinquantaine d'années. Même la chroniqueuse Hélène Buzetti, qu'on ne peut pas accuser de manquer de sensibilité québécoise, a dit que ce n'est pas du tout comparable. Alors j'invite le chef du bloc à regarder les dispositions de la loi et à faire les distinctions et les nuances que la rigueur intellectuelle appelle.
And see what that entails. The member for Belleuil-Chambly.
L'humilité à Rosemont n'a pas cours légal.
And Rosemont, la petite patrie doesn't seem to be legal. But I would ask the member for Rosemont, la petite patrie,
l'Assemblée nationale qui devrait
listen to
au moins
the National Assembly.
Ses amis de Québec solidaire sont contre.
Friends
Les
in
libéraux
Québec
sont
solidaire
contre.
are against it.
Le Parti québécois
The
est
Liberals
contre.
are against
La
it
CAQ
as
est contre. La
is the
seule
CAQ
personne au
and the Parti
Québec qui a
québécois. The only
raison,
person in
Monsieur le
Quebec
Président, c'est le député de
who
Rosemont,
is
la
right
petite
is the
patrie.
member for Rosemont, la petite patrie.
Je suis un peu inquiet, mais
I'm somewhat concerned.
je lui rappellerai
But I would like to
que le
remind
chef
him
du NPD en
that the
1970
NDP leader
a
in
voté contre la loi
1970
sur les mesures
voted
de guerre.
against the War Measures Act.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Burnaby South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a critical moment in our history. In a few weeks, we will enter the third year of this pandemic. Canadians are tired. Tired of a pandemic that has created so much loss and such sacrifice for so many. Canadians are frustrated. Frustrated that so many have found themselves worse off, while those at the very top have only increased their wealth and power. And many are afraid. Afraid of the next wave, of the next variant, but also afraid of the other crises we face, of fires and floods caused by the climate change destroying their homes and their livelihoods, of losing those they love to a toxic drug supply, of not being able to get the care they need or that their loved ones need when they need it. But neither fear, frustration, or fatigue have won over Canadians' fundamental desire to take care of one another. We are here today at this moment because of a result of a failure of leadership. People were abandoned by government that argued over jurisdiction rather than helping people. People were abandoned because governments didn't take this convoy and its impact on people seriously. And they were abandoned by the police, some of whom stood with the occupiers and the occupation. It should never have come to this. It should have never come to a point in time where thousands of workers lost their wages because of blockades at bridges. Thousands of workers lost wages because of blockades of one of the busiest shopping centers in Ottawa, retail workers, people who are already precariously employed. It should never come to the point where residents, families, children were harassed, intimidated, terrorized by the convoy. It should have never come to this. Many people right now are rightly concerned about the impact of the Emergencies Act, that it might crack down on protests in the future. What we're dealing with is not a protest. It is not peaceful. The organizers of this illegal occupation have been clear from the beginning. They haven't shied away from this. They have been brazen about it. They came here to overthrow a democratically elected government. It is a movement funded by foreign influence, and it is fed on disinformation. Its goal is to disrupt our democracy. We share the concern of many Canadians that the government may misuse the powers in the Emergency Act. So I want to be very clear. We will be watching. We will withdraw our support if at any point we feel these powers are being misused. I've been at many protests and strikes, and I've witnessed the full and brutal power of the police being used against peaceful protesters. So I want to make this clear as well. Indigenous land defenders, climate change activists, workers fighting for fairness, and any Canadian using their voice to peacefully demand justice should never be subject to the Emergencies Act. New Democrats will never support that. What has become very clear in this crisis is that there needs to be as well a serious examination of policing in Canada. Occupiers get hugs from the police, while Indigenous and racialized protesters are met with the barrel of a gun. Yep. There are several accounts, very troubling accounts, of current and former law enforcement and military members involved in these occupations. One of the requirements of the Emergencies Act is that after its invocation, there is a public inquiry into its use. This must include a full public inquiry into the role of law enforcement in these occupations, both in their support for the occupiers and in many cases the refusal to enforce the law. L'utilisation de la loi sur les mesures d'urgence est un constat d'échec flagrant pour le gouvernement. Nous n'aurions jamais dû rendre là. Mais la situation de crise à Ottawa nécessite des actions supplémentaires pour éviter que quelque chose de grave se produise. Nous prenons l'usage de la loi sur les mesures d'urgence très au sérieux. Il n'y a pas personne qui veut revoir une situation comme celle de 1970 arrivée à nouveau. Plusieurs personnes sont marquées par l'usage de mesures de guerre en 1970, les arrestations aléatoires, l'usage d'armées dans les rues de Montréal. De nombreuses personnes sont inquiètes qu'une telle situation se reproduise et je les comprends. C'est pourquoi l'usage des mesures d'urgence doit être pris avec un grand sérieux et beaucoup de précautions. Nous sommes rassurés que l'usage de l'armée n'est pas considéré et les droits prévus à la Charte des droits et libertés seront toujours maintenus. Ce qui veut dire que les arrestations et ceci arbitraires ne seront pas justifiées par la loi. Mais l'NPD croit qu'il n'y a aucune justification pour le moment d'utiliser les mesures d'urgence au Québec. Nous demandons des garanties au Premier ministre que les mesures d'urgence seront seulement utilisées où elles sont réellement nécessaires. À tout moment, l'NPD est prêt à utiliser les mécanismes à sa disposition pour révoquer les pouvoirs au gouvernement. Il n'est pas de question de donner un chèque en blanc. Et nous aurons le gouvernement à l'œil pour éviter quelconque abus. In the last few weeks, we've heard a lot about divisions in our country. That division, sadly, has been fed and amplified by members in this House. That has to end. Using a pandemic as a political wedge to score points off your opponents to try to win a leadership or an election is wrong. and frankly, dangerous. This virus doesn't care who you voted for. Wearing a mask isn't a partisan activity. Vaccines save lives. And the vast majority of Canadians and members of Parliament know this and have supported vaccination efforts. We cannot let Canadians' trust in science and public health be eroded by political opportunism. The pandemic is changing, and our response has to change as well. Restrictions are being lifted. We need a plan to get out of the pandemic, to get to the end of the pandemic. A plan based on science and our fundamental responsibility to take care of one another. Canadians who have done everything asked of them now want to know what to do next. Canadians have followed the rules, but they need to believe that restrictions are fair and make sense. We know that things can change quickly. New variants may appear, the evidence may change. But without a clear plan, confusion, disinformation, and resentment grows. We believe that a plan to get to the end of the pandemic, to get us out of this pandemic, has to include the urgent repair of our healthcare system so that people can get the care when they need it. It has to include finishing the job of vaccination, especially of our children. And we have to make sure there's global access to vaccines so we avoid future variants and waves of infection. And we need to move forward on solving the problems that this pandemic has only made worse. The reality is, working people have paid the price of this pandemic. While big companies took government money and gave out shareholder dividends and CEO bonuses, frontline workers got sick because they had to work without sick leave. Parents struggled to keep their kids at home while schools were closed and big box stores stayed open. You are right to be angry that life has only gotten harder over these past 2 years, that it is almost impossible to buy a home, to keep a roof over your head, or to rent a decent place to live, because wealthy speculators are driving up the cost of housing. You are right to be angry that the cost of groceries go up to feed the profits of wealthy corporate grocery stores. You are right to be angry that you work hard and pay your taxes, but the super wealthy and big businesses don't pay their fair share. And you are right to be angry that your life has become harder, while the super wealthy and powerful have only added to their wealth and power. I'm angry too. And when I get angry, I fight. But I learned long ago that my anger and my fight is not with the powerless. Your anger, your fight is not with Canadians. It's with those at the very top, the powerful who have built a system rigged against working people. We can change this. We can change this, but only if we come together to fight for a Canada that doesn't leave people behind while others profit. The story of this pandemic is not one of division, it's one of solidarity. It's a story of frontline healthcare workers showing up day after day in impossible situations. It is a story of grocery workers and farmers and truckers keeping us fed, of teachers doing their best to connect with children through screens. Our story is one of neighbors helping each other get vaccinated, helping each other when they're in need. We will not let the last few weeks define this pandemic for us. Canadians have sacrificed too much, lost too many loved ones, missed out on too many moments to allow our country to become divided by hate and violence. Don't let your anger turn into hatred. We know that hatred is like a fire. When it's allowed to grow, it will consume everything. As I hold my daughter, I often think about the world I want for her. I want her to walk through the world without fear. I want her to always feel like she belongs. I don't want her to face the same struggles I have. I believe this is what we all want for our children. This is my hope, that our decisions in the coming days are guided by this desire to build a better and safer, more just world where all of our children believe that they belong. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for